Good morning, boys and girls. Elmer started the he started the camera a little sooner than I thought he was going to. Good morning, boys and girls. This is the old buddy Don. Adventures of the Broken Retired. I'm here with my old buddy Elmer the Reckless Remote. It feels like it's been forever since you and I sat down and talked. Um, so we're gonna fix that today. We're gonna sit down and talk today. Um, I want to tell you a little story uh, about three guys. Okay, there's one guy named Mr. Blevins, one guy named Mr. Coker, and one guy named Mr. Wise. Now, this story is not a historical record of what these guys did. We're touching on the lives of a couple of people for the sake of the story. And at the end of the video, you'll probably understand that a little bit more. I am not a historian. I am not an expert on. I'm not an expert on anything. I'm not an expert on anything at all. I'm just some guy who has a camera and likes to sit in front of it and talk about stuff. Now, I did do some research on this. This is not stuff that's all made up. This is just a story that I found to be interesting. It's about three guys: Mr. Blevins, Mr. Coker, and Mr. Wise. Now, none of these guys ever reached out and changed the world in such a way as to make them household names. I'm sure you've probably never heard of them. I had only ever heard of one of them when this started, but it came to be a pretty interesting story. End of the video, you'll understand more. We're going to start out by talking about a fellow by the name of Jacques E. Blevins. Mr. Blevins was born in Evansville, Indiana, 11th day of March, 1891. It wasn't way too long after that, still as a young child. He was moved with his family from Evansville, Indiana, down to Texas. Now, I'm assuming that they ended up somewhere very close to Austin, because history tells us that Mr. Blevins went to the Austin Academy and the University of Texas. Um, After Mr. Blevins left the University of Texas, of course, he had to make a living. He was a young man, he had to make a living. So after he left the University of Texas, he moved to Chicago, where he took on to selling newspapers. Um, he went from selling newspapers into working for the Bresvold Fixture Manufacturing Company. I tried coming up with pictures or addresses or something about and I'm having to look because this is a hard word to pronounce. Brisvold, I guess it's Brisvold. I'll put it in the picture, maybe right here, so you can see how it's spelled. Pronounce it as you feel correct. Um, anyway, he went on there to and he got taken on as a machinist. From being a machinist, and I find this to be interesting. From being a machinist, it reports that he moved on to a quote position of some importance. Now, I'm not sure what a position of some importance means or is, because everybody who works for the company is important. Otherwise, they wouldn't work there. Companies don't hire people just, hey man, let's have an even number of employees. Um, anyway, he worked at the Breedsvold fixture manufacturing plant, moved up to a position of some importance, went from there to being the manager of the home machine department for the Wilcox and Gibbs Sewing Machine Company in St. Louis. From St. Louis, he decides to move out west. He went off to New Mexico, where he spent some time as a cowpuncher, which I'm assuming is the term used then for cowboy. June 1st of 1912, he moved off to Dallas. He got picked up by the American Fire Insurance Association and worked there as a manager. This time in his life, he's 21 years old. So in the last 5 years, he's got 5 years, less than 5 years, 3 years. In the last 3 years, he has moved around quite a bit, gone from paperboy to being a manager for the Fire Insurance Association. He also spent time as the vice president for the Breckenridge State Bank and Trust Company in Breckenridge, Texas. Somehow, he takes that resume. I find this interesting. Maybe he was just incredibly smart. Wouldn't be hard to be a lot smarter than me. Somehow he takes that resume of, I think it's a total of 5 years that he goes from being a newspaper boy in Chicago to being vice president of the Breckenridge State Bank and Trust Company, and then making a decision to become a manufacturing magnate, whatever the correct pronunciation is, in Texas, and decides he's going to start a company, and he decides the company's name is going to be the Southern Motor Manufacturing Association, which is going to be a huge, and I do mean huge. I mean, the plant that he had, or was going to have, or going to build, or going to use, would sit on a 52-acre lot, which was actually donated to him by the city of Houston. I don't understand how he goes from a newspaper boy to doing this, but either way, he got a 52-acre lot donated from the city of Houston to build his plant. His plant was planned to be a 343,500 square foot facility where they would be producing automobiles, tractors, and trucks. And he actually put the motor company together and got started on the plant. Of course, all this takes a lot of money. So what he did was he sold stock to raise the money to build the plant and build the automobiles. He sold the stock by hiring good people to work for him to sell stock, but he also wined and dined every prospective investor that he could, and he showed off his products and he advertised. He ended up selling $6 million worth of stock. Now, $6 million, that's 1919 money. $6 million in stocks $6 million, not just in stocks. $6 million in 1919 was $125 million in today's money, which is a lot of money. $125 million is quite a bit. And he had this huge facility and the acreage to do it. And he actually did produce some automobiles and did produce some tractors, none of which lived up to the expectations or to the promises that he, Mr. Blevins, and his advertising said they would. But he was still readily out there peddling stock and making promises and such. How do you get so many people to buy into a plan like that? And the only thing I can figure is, first of all, you're a great salesman. And evidently I do have a picture of Mr. Blevins. Evidently you have the charisma to be able to convince people to do it. But something else that you want to keep in mind as well is that in 1919, 1920, that wasn't that long after the Civil War. I mean, the Civil War was over in 1865. So 65 to 1900 is what, 35 years? Add so 1920, it's 55 years after the Civil War. The people in the South were still very hungry for manufacturing. The South was more agricultural than it was mechanical, and business people were that was my computer screen going out, were very, very hungry to have big manufacturing businesses come to the South. So his plans for the building and his rhetoric and his stories, people wanted it. People were hungry for it. There's a lot of people who felt as though this was a great idea. And of course, the 20s, things were going pretty well. In the 20s, they were going pretty well. Directly post World War One. So there was a lot of people who wanted to sign on. So selling stock may very well have been, if people have the money, they're going to buy it. Well, one of the guys that was one of the original stock buyers into Mr. Blevins' company was the second name on the list that I gave you at the beginning of this story here. A fellow by the name of William Thomas, or W.T., W.T. Coker. Mr. Coker was from Louisiana. Actually, I think he was originally born in Alabama, but he had spent a bunch of time in Louisiana, spent a bunch of time in Texas, and of course, around here is Louisiana. Around here, people who are from Louisiana or live in Louisiana, spending time in Texas is a pretty common thing. But W.T. Coker spent some time in Texas, and somehow he heard, of course, he was back in Louisiana, but he heard about this opportunity to buy in stock into Mr. Blevins' company, and did. And he bought $2,150 worth of shares into Mr. Blevins' Southern Motor Manufacturing Association. Now, $2,150 worth of stock was 21 and a half shares, $100 a share. And that adds up. If you adjust that for inflation, that $2,150 is actually $70,000. It's actually, if you want to be specific, it's $70,537.37. So inflation has changed things quite a bit. And he had quite a bit of money set in Mr. Blevins' company. And everything was actually going pretty well for Mr. Blevins. And of course, I'm sure W.T. Coker was very happy because everything was roses. We're going to put Mr. Coker aside for a minute and get back to Mr. Blevins. 1922 rolls around, and it seems that people are starting to get a little bit nervous that Mr. Blevins' promises are not coming to fruition, and stockholders are being ghosted. There's a bunch of monkey business that starts going on. Things are not looking good for Mr. Blevins and his company and the people who work for him. We have to step back in time just a little bit with Mr. Blevins. At the onset of Mr. Blevins' adventure into Southern Motor Manufacturing Association, one of the reasons that investors were so excited by him was because he was touted. There was a book that was printed in 1918 called Texans and Their State. 1918. This book was it was a newspaper reference book, and it told the story of about 20 big Texas businessmen. And one of those big Texas businessmen, of course, was Mr. Blevins. how he got that way. I don't understand that part. I don't understand how he went from newspaper boy to manufacturing magnate so quickly. But in that book, he is quoted as being the foremost promoter of Mammoth Enterprise in Texas. Mammoth Industrial Enterprise in Texas. Anyway, 1922 rolls around. Things aren't looking so good for Mr. Blevins. People are starting to ask questions. There was a bunch of accusations from a bunch of people. I don't know what the truth of the situation was. Rumors say that he was, what he would do, he had a very, very small amount of vehicles that were built. And rumors have it that he would take those automobiles to one area and show them to people. Then he would take those same automobiles and move them to another area and show them to the same people, representing them as being other vehicles rather than being the vehicles that they had already seen, which is probably not such a good idea. But I don't know if any of that was ever proven. That's really not the point of the story. The point of Mr. Blevins' story, you'll get more towards the end of this, okay? 1925 rolls around. The federal government decides that Mr. Blevins' business, he ended up merging the business with the National Motors Association and the National Motors Fiscal Agency to try to save it. Rumors had it that he was selling stock in the National Motors Fiscal Agency, but actually filling out and handing over the stock certificates for the National Motors Company, which was in receivership at the time. There's all kinds of rumors swirling around it. There were 17 people from the company who ended up being brought up on federal mail fraud charges, 18 federal mail fraud charges. They all ended up with fines and jail sentences, although, as far as I could tell, the only one who actually had to serve a sentence was Jacques Blevins. He went to Leavenworth in Kansas for his actions with the company. And of course, that means that the investors in his company all lost their money, which would include Mr. Coker. Now, I want to put a little note here. If you want, and there's some pictures that I'm going to include, it was very, very, very difficult to find solid information on this stuff. A lot of it is, it's happened so long ago. There's not a lot of information. There's nothing. The only way that I could do it was to spend a whole bunch of time Googling Jacques Blevins and spend a whole bunch of time Googling Southern Motors Manufacturing Association. And if you know how Google works and you live in Louisiana and you put the word Southern into your computer, it automatically brings up millions of things. I did come across some very interesting sites, and I do recommend, if you have the curiosity to know more of Mr. Blevins than what I've given here, because all I'm doing is just touching the surface. I'm not delving deep in. I'm just touching the surface, and I'm touching the surface for a specific reason, which, again, at the end, you'll understand. That's why at the beginning of this, I didn't say that we had. I'm not a historian. I'm not doing a historical record. I'm just talking about these guys. I'm talking about these guys for a reason. Now, we're going to get back to Mr. Coker. Mr. Coker lost his investment in Southern Motors Manufacturing Association, which was, $70,000? Yeah, $70,000. Mr. Coker, it appears, also was an investor in another company called the Bryceland Curing Company. This was a warehouse facility that was for sweet potato curing facility. I don't know exactly what curing a sweet potato means. I know that it's got basically it's a storage and time thing to where they last a lot longer. It increased the value of the crop. It increased the amount of crop that could be sold because it lasted longer. It did a whole bunch curing the sweet potatoes and curing a lot of other things for that matter. Improved the farmers. It raised the farmers' income. It helped them quite a bit. So Mr. Coker had the opportunity to buy into the Bryceland. What is it? Bryceland Sweet Potato Curing Company, which was up in Bryceland, Louisiana, northwestern Louisiana. Now, he bought, and I've got a note right here that says, I think, no, I didn't, because the newspaper article didn't say. He bought into the Bryceland, W.T. Coker bought into the Bryceland Company, and then he must have lost his money there as well, because there's newspaper articles about a year later. It's funny, because if you look at the Bryceland Curing Company, there are articles that say how wonderful it was and how much money everybody was making and how great it was. And then you can find an article where about a year after it opened, it went to sheriff's sale for taxes. So if it went to sheriff's sale for taxes, I would assume that the stockholders lost their money. So Mr. Coker lost his money on the Southern, W.T. Coker lost his money on the Southern Motors Association gig, as well as the Bryceland Potato Curing Company. And if you read through, I found it to be, I've been sitting here behind the computer terminal going through these newspaper articles from 100 years ago. The Bienville Democrat is one of them. Houston Chronicle is another one. There's a bunch of them. Houston Post. There's a bunch of them. But the amount of people in the early 20s, mid 20s, and really after that as well, that were going through sheriff sales to pay their taxes was unbelievable. Wait just a minute. There are columns and columns and columns in those newspapers about people going through, people having their properties seized for tax sales. A lot of those properties that went to sheriff's sale, the taxes that they owed were less than $10. And typically, the articles in the paper would say that they were taxes for the past 2 years. Now, if you haven't paid taxes in 2 years, and the amount is $10, that works out to $5 a year, right? Well, $5 adjusted for inflation, which is incredible to think about this. Adjusted for inflation, $5 in 1919 money or 1920 money is $164 in 2025 money. So, for $164 a year taxes, they were seizing people's property and putting property up for sheriff's sale. And it was happening to a lot of people. I find that disheartening. I find it disturbing to know that people had to go through that. That's horrible. Anyway, so Mr. Blevins ends up basically losing everything, including his personal reputation. And he ends up spending time in Leavenworth in Kansas. I don't know what happened to him from there. There's nothing I could find written about the guy after that, other than to say that in 1953, he passed away. Mr. Coker, there wasn't a lot written about to start with, because he's just some guy. He was just a stockholder. There's not a lot about him, so you've got to research the papers. Um, there's not a lot, but you want to do something really interesting? Go to, um, it takes a while to figure out how to do it because all these newspaper places want you to sign up, right? Well, I didn't want to sign up. I don't want to spend, you know, $50 a month for access to their newspaper archives. I just wanted to look at some stuff. So I figured out how to um, how to look at the stuff without having to sign up. Um, and if you go back and read the newspapers from 100 years ago, it is absolutely incredible. First of all, what they told stories about. You know, it used to be in a small town, everybody knew everybody, right? Well, I can understand why, because there's a social column in the Bienville Democrat and in the Houston Post and in a couple of other newspapers I looked at. There's a social column, and the social column would say, Mr. and Mrs. Whoever spent the weekend at a birthday party at Mr. and Mrs. Whoever's house. There's all these just stacks of, they talk about all these people doing stuff like, you know, talked on the porch while having coffee. And it gives their names and where they're from. And I don't know how they got all that. It must have a reporter. I can't imagine a reporter having a job where that was his job, was to go around and see, you know, what people were doing every day. But it was really incredible. Something else that's really incredible too is that if you look at, you got to read the advertising in these old papers. You got to read the advertising, because there was first of all, none of the businesses that advertise have an address. They have the name of the town they're from, but no address, because evidently you didn't need an address if you were whoever whose shoe store. Then you just went downtown and looked for the sign that said ever whose shoe store, I guess. I don't know. One of them I saw, none of them had phone numbers either, or it's very rare to have phone numbers. And one of the companies that I saw advertised their phone number, and their phone number was 5. That was their phone number. 5. It was a single digit phone number, which I thought was great. It's very, very interesting to go back and look at these old papers from 100 years ago to see how much things have changed. Now, at the beginning of this story, there were 3 names, right? There was Mr. Blevins, there was Mr. Coker, and there was Mr. Wise. So, we've covered Mr. Blevins. Well, we've touched on, because that's all the plan for this was. You'll understand that in a minute. We've touched on W.T. Coker, who also, by the way, fades off into history, but they do say that he died in 1953, same year that Blevins died. W.T. Coker died. So the other name was I.H. Wise, Mr. Wise, I.H. Wise. Well, let me tell you who Mr. Wise is, okay? Mr. Wise, Ivan Harris Wise, is Amy's grandfather. Amy's grandfather, Mr. Wise, was a very successful businessman in North Louisiana. He was successful enough that he had 6 daughters or more. Man, I think there might have been 8. I don't remember now. I should have checked that before I sat here in front of this camera. He had 6 or 8 daughters, of which one of them is the absolute spitting image of Amy. You would think that those pictures that were taken over 100 years ago, you would think one of those is Amy. He put 6 women, girls, in his family through Berkeley in California in the teens. Now that is an incredible feat. He was also an investor. I don't know very much about Mr. Wise. I do know that he was also an investor, although I never saw the full list of investors in Southern Motors Manufacturing Association. I just found Mr. Coker there. Now, it's an interesting story of how I found Mr. Coker to be an investor in the Southern Motors Manufacturing Association. Sit tight just a second, I'll show you. So how did I find out that W.T. Coker was an investor in the Southern Motor Manufacturing Association? And how did I find out that Mr. Blevins was the owner of the company? What made me curious? What brought this to light? What made this happen? Well, I'm sitting here in my office one day, and Amy walks in. And she's got this right here. And she's got this right here. And she has this. This is a picture of a ship's crew from World War II. I find this to be an absolutely fantastic, fascinating photograph. It's too big for me to be able to scan it. It's too big for me to be able to do much with it. It's hard to see any faces. It's hard to see any names. But I am dying to spend about 3 hours doing some hardcore going over to find out who is in this picture and who would have an interesting story to tell, if not every single one of them. So, this is, I'm going to read this. This is from the Class 2345 Radio Materials School, Naval Research Laboratory, Washington, D.C., taken November 16th of 1945. Now, I have never looked. I have not read all these names. For some reason, this picture is in Amy's family. So, someone important to her family is in this picture, I would assume, because why else would you keep the picture? But I'm going to go over this sooner or later. Okay? Also, in this, did you watch my video photos? If you haven't, you ought to go back and see that. You might like that. All of this. See this? Well, now they're falling out. I gotta bend over and pick them up. This right here is a whole bunch of old pictures. And I pulled these out and looked at them. And I asked Amy what she was going to do with them. And she said, well, I don't know anybody named those pictures. I don't know, there's nothing written on the backs of the pictures. There's nothing. She said she was going to throw them away. Well, I got a thing about pictures. And I don't think pictures should be thrown away. Excuse me. So, whoops, almost knocked the camera over. So, I went through here, found some pictures, and made the video photographs that you've hopefully seen. If you haven't, check it out. You see now I'm sitting here on camera, I'm making a mess. This is probably not going to be real easy to get back in here. I'm going to have to do this in a minute. I can't do this. Wait just a second. Let me get you up. Let me fix this. Hang on. All right. Appreciate your patience there. Got them back in here. Also, along with this, is this envelope right here. And in this envelope, first of all, there's a whole bunch of handwritten notes, receipts, things like that, for bank loans and promissory notes and business that was done. See this? This is all a whole bunch of handwritten receipts and promissory notes from banks. Watch. Promissory notes from banks. This is all to do with Mr. Wise. In fact, that one that I just showed you, April 21st, 1921. $1,025. I'm sorry, $125. This is all to do with Mr. Wise and his business. And then there's these. There's a whole bunch more. Wait just a second. There's a whole bunch more receipts right here. All to do with Mr. Wise's business, and these are all dated. This is from the Bank of Bienville, June 30th, 1920. This is very, very, very interesting stuff to read through. There's these telegrams. This stuff is so delicate. This telegram, this is real telegrams. This one is dated March 5th, 1922, and it says there's a balance of $110 due on your note since, there's a balance of $110 due on your note due October late last week, or October 1st last. Please come over and arrange. Evidently, this guy had a past due amount. This is not Mr. Wise's past due amount. This is Mr. T.E. Parker. So anyway, there's a bunch of stuff like this in here. It's really incredible stuff to look through. There is a picture. I have no idea who the picture. Oh, wait a minute. Ruby Hayes, Diane Hartman, and Grandma. Can't read it. I was hoping there'd be a picture of Ivan Wise in here, but there isn't. By the way, don't you find it interesting? I find it interesting that my last name is Wiseman, and Amy's maiden name is Wise. They're both kind of unusual names, and we both have them. All right, put this stuff back in here. This I have to show you real quick. This is a postcard written to Mr. Wise. Mrs. Wise, I'm sorry. This is a postcard written to Amy's grandmother. Look at the address. Mrs. I.H. Wise, Bienville, Louisiana. There's no house number, there's no street. This is how it used to be. The postage is from 1929. It looks like 1929. Stuff's very, very hard to read. It's all faded. And it's 1 cent. This, I think, is really cool. This is also addressed to Mr. and Mrs. Ivan Wise. It's got a 2-cent stamp on it. But look at the address. Mr. and Mrs. Ivan Wise, Bienville, Louisiana. No street name, no nothing, just Bienville, Louisiana. This is a birth announcement. And there's no year. All right. Let's turn it into a treasure hunt. Now, also in here, There's this, which we haven't discussed yet. That is a stock certificate made out to a fellow by the name of Mr. Lowe in the Richardson Petroleum Corporation. There's a bunch of these. These are stock shares in the Baxter Lumber Company made out to the same Mr. Lowe, and there's a bunch of these. And then there's these. And there's a bunch of these. Amy says she's got a bunch more of them. She's not sure where they're at. These are stock certificates in the Southern Motors Manufacturing Association, Mr. Blevins' company. This one is for 5 shares, dated December 6th, 1919. Made out to a Mr. W.T. Coker. Mr. Blevins' signature down at the bottom, as you can see. This is where my interest in the Southern Motor Manufacturing Association came from. Now, we knew that these had no value. The story that Amy had always been told was they were stocks that her grandfather lost when this market crashed, which is not accurate because these Southern Motors Association stocks are all dated 1919, 1920. And the company was gone. By 1922, during 1922, the company was gone. 1925, Mr. Blevins went to Leavenworth. So those stocks were never something that Mr. Wise lost, and they're not made out to Mr. Wise. They're made out to W.T. Coker. But you can imagine my surprise when she said, do a story on these. And I went into Google and found out all this stuff about Mr. Blevins and Mr. W.T. Coker. You know, people live interesting lives and interesting things happen. What nobody has any knowledge in Amy's family to this point that I'm aware of, although after they see this video, maybe they'll tell me something. Because there's only one of her sisters. Amy's got 5 or 6 sisters. And there's only one of them who knows that this video is taking place. And she just found out a couple days ago. Nobody knows how Mr. Wise came into possession of these, because nowhere on anything else in that envelope or written on any of the pictures or anything like that, nowhere is there any information at all, period, not even a little bit. There is the mention of the name W.T. Coker. So how did W.T. Coker's stock in the Southern Motors Manufacturing Association come into the hands of Ivan Wise? Nobody knows. I find it interesting that it's here. The other stock certificates, Richardson Petroleum Company and the Baxter Lumber Company, which, again, were impossible to find information on because I know that I had the right company because the inception dates for both of these companies, for Richardson's and for Baxter's, were both accurate. But the companies have been defunct forever. There's not a lot, and you know, I'm a boomer, so I am not the world's best Googler, and maybe other people can Google things better than I can. I'm not signing up for free trials of anything after having done it a couple of times and found out that once you, okay, so you sign up for a free trial, right? Well, to sign up for the free trial, you've got to put your information in there, for a credit card information in there, so that they can bill you when the time comes around if you don't um, uh, end your subscription. And then when you go to end the subscription, you can't get back in there to end it. So I've been nailed on that a couple times, and once was enough, and I did it twice. Anyway, so are the stocks worth anything was a question that everybody had, and of course they're not. But interestingly enough, because of the story that goes along with the Southern Motors Manufacturing Association, these stock certificates range in value as I found them on places like eBay and things like that. There's a term, and I meant to include that term. There's a term specifically that applies to people who collect old stock certificates. And I forget what it is. I should have had that handy better. Anyway, so these stock certificates you can find for sale, and they range in price anywhere from $600 to from $60 to $800, depending on signatures and dates and certificate numbers and condition, things like that, which I find pretty interesting. So there is value in these. These other ones are not worth anything other than to collectors who might want to give you 10, 15 bucks a piece for them or something. I would suggest to Amy that she sells these because they're not getting in any better condition stuck in an envelope in her closet. And if they are collectibles, I'm a firm believer, like old pictures should never be thrown away. If it's a collectible, it belongs with collections. If I were to go to Antique Roadshow with some piece that was in my family, and I were to come to find out that it was hand carved by the servant of King Henry VIII, and it was worth, $25,000 or $25 million, I would no longer retain possession of that piece. I would put it in a museum where it belongs. It belongs to be protected, and it belongs to be shown to the people who can appreciate it for what it is, not left in an envelope in a closet and at some point in time thrown away. That's pointless. All right. Well, I appreciate you. This has been a pretty long video. It's longer than I thought it was going to be. This has been fun. This whole research project really turned out to be something pretty cool to do. Reading the old newspapers was fantastic. I really enjoyed that. And I would suggest that you do it. Texas Portal to History, I think is what it was called. I might put some more information. That's what I should do. I can put some more information in the video because I have editing capability, like the word for people who collect stocks. I can put that in there. I'm going to put some pictures in here, although I've got to be careful of copyright infringements. I'm going to put some pictures in here. Anyway, I hope that you found it kind of an interesting story, and I hope that you enjoyed it. I certainly appreciate you being here, especially staying through the video. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. It's killer important. And I look forward to seeing you again soon on the next video. So, thank you very much. All right, Elmer. Time to take it to the house. Elmer, time to take it to the house.